Now, the older vehicles, we tend to believe that they may not be as affected. And there is some indication that because of the way their circuitry is put together, just like vacuum tubes, radios with vacuum tubes, they are more resilient to a charge.
Adapt 2030 Mini Ice Age Conversations covers changes in our climate due to a new and intensifying grand solar minimum. In the media, overlooking, downplaying, or burying cold weather changes occurring on our planet. This is in order to keep the global warming agenda steaming full speed ahead. I do this podcast and radio program because we need to begin conversations on how to adapt our food growing strategies long before 2030 as agricultural zones shift, affecting global crop output, but very few mainstream media outlets are talking about the most important issue of our time, cold weather crop losses. Our sun is going through a 400-year cycle, which has effects on our weather patterns as our magnetosphere weakens and the jet streams go out of flow. It's not CO2, it's not you, it's the sun. Are you ready to thrive in the grand solar minimum? Then join me for Mini Ice Age Conversations. I'm your host, David Dubine. Dr. Anita Bailey, author of Cold Times, How to Prepare for the Mini Ice Age. Now, we had an interview about a year ago. Truly an amazing read. It's a no-holds-barred guidebook for surviving these changes that are unfurling in front of us. It's about choosing safe locations. Heating is going to be a major issue. We saw that last year. I bet this year will be cooler. Storing and growing cold-resilient foods, and water collection, and how to, retrofit your homes for colder weather and heavier snow, sheltering in, how to do livestock, raising different types of vegetables, plants, smaller animals like chickens and rabbits, etc. It is an absolute education experience book. Highly recommended to anybody out there. And you can find that up on Amazon. And also, we have a link here also for the book for 20% off for anybody listening today.
There's three basic kinds of electromagnetic pulse. There's the E1, which is typically the product of a nuclear blast. It travels virtually at the speed of light and arrives instantly and damages electronics and satellites and anything that's in its path. E2 is the kind of electromagnetic pulse that occurs with lightning and is a secondary wave that comes off of a nuclear blast. And E3 is what we typically see with a coronal mass ejection, a CME. And the E3 requires long lines in order to build up its tremendous power surge. So long lines of 300 feet plus, whatever it is. So the grid is thousands and thousands of miles of chargeable lines all across the country. Picture your electric car plugged into these thousands of miles and a surge from a CME coming into it. I'm pretty sure your electric car is fried. If your electric car has 300 feet of wiring in it, it's going to collect that energy from the CME and could have a similar effect. Now, we just don't know. We believe that car manufacturers have been using the facilities in New Mexico to test their cars, but they're keeping it secret. So we don't know what kind of result they're getting. We do know that long power lines, being antennas for the CME collection, the same power lines that run into your home, are attached to your appliances, your computers, ATMs. How about smart meters that are attached to the grid? How about autonomous cars? Satellites are certainly affected by CMEs. Even if they turn them, they still pick up a charge from the protons and things that are coming in with the CME. Railroad signaling, all kinds of navigation tools and equipment, GPS because of the satellite charging. Radio, of course, radio is affected fairly routinely by changes in solar weather, and ham radio operators were among the first to become aware that their signals could be lost or disrupted by whatever's happening on the sun.
And this episode's brought to you by TrueLeafMarket.com. Heirloom and organic seeds since 1974. Full range of garden seeds, microgreen seeds, sprouting seeds, wheatgrass, grain seeds, flower seeds, herb seeds, and ground cover crop. I encourage you to take a look at their website, TrueLeafMarket.com, and they even have free starter guides there for you to learn how to grow sprouts, microgreens, herbs, and wheatgrass. Use the link below and give yourself the gift of organic and heirloom seeds.
How about airplanes in flight? They're built to withstand an E2. If the engines turn off on an airplane in flight, it may be possible that all they have to do is turn them on again. And I don't know if they turn an ignition key or what magic they have to go through to make that happen. We don't know. We just plain don't know. And I'm sure that somebody has tested it and does know. And that's part of the reason why the EMP Commission has been so concerned. Every couple of years, you'll see another report from them saying, we really need to get ready for something like this, folks. And of course, that doesn't seem to spur much change. We know that there are health effects from EMPs and CMEs. There's an increased permeability of the blood-brain barrier. There's an increase in something called a beta amyloid protein, which is associated with Alzheimer's in studies on rats, which may apply only to rats, but might apply to people as well. We know that CMEs have been shown to worsen multiple sclerosis symptoms.
And you really need to ponder that for a moment. All of the global warming that you had seen, and you notice how we were just pushed off the air there when Anita was talking about the effects of these EMPs on your health and the government doing studies to show you which areas. So we just both got bumped off the air. That is a real life example of what just happened to us talking about these. I guess they're touchy subjects that you're not supposed to really get into, because we just both got ripped off the air here. And she was talking about electrical discharge from the sun affecting health, and the government doing the studies on this and not publishing the information. And then they themselves saying, hey, we need to do more about the transportation system. And hey, we need to do more about what's happening with our electrical power grids, because these EMPs are energetic effects with 100% correlation coming off of the sun at every grand solar minimum. And you just saw that effect. That was weird. I can't describe what just happened. And Anita, are you back with us again?
I am back.
That was the strangest thing when you were talking about the health effects from the EMPs and then the government regulation and the government studies that they need to do more about it, and we both got cut off the air. That is the strangest thing right there.
Well, it's nice to be wanted, isn't it? Oh, God.
What?
Man.
I didn't realize that we weren't broadcasting until I saw this this thing on my Skype here that said, hey, you're not on. I was, wait a second, how did I lose the signal on that? And then you came back. I came back before you did here and started talking again to try to explain the 2 kilovolt charge. You were talking about the lines before you start. You were talking about the effects of health and all the studies that have been done with CMEs and EMPs affecting human health that the government knows about but isn't talking about, as well as the damage on airlines, as well as vehicles, transportation, electrical grids based on CMEs and EMPs. And I just lost her again. That is incredible. Anita, you'll have to call back if you're listening on the show. I just lost you once again here talking about sensitive issues. You see, the censorship that goes on, they do not want you to know about these things that are happening on our planet. The amount of charge that's going to come in, the amount of charge that's coming in on a CME that's going to hit our overhead power grid is going to be 2 kilovolts. And we're talking about something that's a kilometer or longer. Something that's going to be at least 1 kilometer, which is like half a mile or longer. These are going to pick up 2 kilovolt charges Also, I talked to some people telling me that underground cables will also pick up the charge as long as they're insulated underground cables. So it doesn't matter if it's above ground or below ground, that charge coming in on a CME is going to grab onto anything longer than half a mile, and it is going to overcharge all the circuitry. Now, if those underground cables have any way that they're touching the earth, they're going to ground out. So that's not the problem. Everything else is going to pick up this massive extra charge. And you got to realize 2 kilovolts on top of an already overcharged line, A, that's going to start fires, and B, it's going to short out everything else that's up there. You're going to have so much disturbance, and those lines will stay charged extra. Let's say the CME passes. That charge is not going to dissipate the instant that the event's over. That's going to stay charged up there for some time after. These are the whole things that they don't want you to really know about or talk about too much. And the Faraday cages and these times of events going on, the Faraday cage, great. But as soon as you start talking about health effects that the government's not telling you about, because here's the thing, every grand solar minimum, 100% correlation, 100%, every single grand solar minimum, we get one of these EMP, CME, Carrington events. Every single time. They find it in the proxy record with oxygen 18 isotopes. They find it through the ice cores. They find it through so many different proxies that when they look around beryllium 10, you can just go through the list and they're finding these events occur right inside that same band. Now we're talking about grand solar minimums, grand solar maximums, and I was trying to get to the point here when I got cut off the air talking about for the last 3,000 years, in the 1990s, we came through a grand solar maximum, which means the sun was at its highest activity state in 3,000 years through the 1990s. So that might explain what some of the warming was about as well. They try to say it's all CO2, but they forget to say, hey, our sun was active state it had been in thousands of years. Now we're coming in, and that activity state is going to drop off a cliff, and we're heading straight into a grand solar minimum. So it's really interesting. It's like what we're seeing in the jet streams. We're getting extreme heat, and then extreme cold, and then extreme cold and extreme heat. And there's no in-between phase, really. It's just an instant change from one to the other. Before we had seasons, we had spring, we had fall. So that's why I'm also mentioning that this winter, I do believe we're going to go straight into winter. We're going to go straight into it with no season, and whatever's left out in the fields is going to have some very difficult time being harvested with the snow coming down, and it might even freeze the heads that are out there. So look for early season freeze damage events. But Anita, I'd like you to continue with what you were talking about with the human health effects, with the CMEs and the possibilities of airliners coming out of the skies during these events if they can't restart the engines, and just things that they don't want you to talk about like we're talking about here. And if we do get cut off the line again, please stay with us and we'll try to get back on, and I will do my best to stay on and reconnect. Anita?
Okay.
Here we go. Let's see what happens this time. Woo, woo, woo.
There was a demonstrated worsening of multiple sclerosis symptoms associated with CMEs. And MS involves the neural centers in the musculature, so you can kind of say, well, there's some electrical disturbance here that's affecting the actual bodies of these people who are sensitive to it. Increase of risk of rupture of brain aneurysms, which leads to increase in strokes among folks who are in that situation, who might have an aneurysm and not know they have it until it does rupture. Now, as far as anybody can tell, there's no obvious effect on plants or livestock that are otherwise in good health from a CME. However, that's looking at historical records, and we really don't know. We really don't know, because people who are starving don't generally go out and look at their plants and say, that leaf looks a little yellow. They don't care. If it's growing, they're happy to have it. So if there is an increase in the risk of a CME penetrating through the decreased geomagnetic shield on Earth, maybe it's some combination of effects that hits the plants and hits the livestock, because certainly food plants and livestock were badly affected during the Maunder minimum, and I'm pretty sure not just cold. Additional risks from a CME, and this is this is something that's rarely talked about. We talk about a CME like it's a single event that occurs one time and then it's done. It's possible that CMEs come in multiple pulses and they can occur over the span of weeks to months and perhaps followed by a second CME. We haven't been observing them long enough to understand that. If the Carrington event, which is considered the main event to have happened on September 2nd or 3rd, 1859. However, there was an initial event that occurred in August, late August, I believe it was August 28th or 29th, 1859, that was an initiator of the CME. It wasn't the same. However, it did cause huge auroras and affected telegraph lines and transmission at that time. And then it seemed to kind of die down, and then boom, we had the Carrington event, the huge pulse. So if you have your Faraday cage and you have all of your equipment set in there and you're good and you have the CME experience, you see a great aurora wherever you are that lights up the night sky and keeps it lit up enough that you can read outdoors in the middle of the night, then when it's over with, don't go take your stuff out of your Faraday cage and plug it in and see if it'll work. Leave it sit there for a while in case you get a follow-on CME from that. Secondarily, there's plenty of bad actors in the world too, on the other side and perhaps even on our side, who might want to launch a EMP from a nuclear blast around the time of a CME and try to piggyback an extreme power surge together with it. That EMP will immediately end all the electronics, and the CME will finish the power lines. So you could have people who are not very nice using a CME event to make things worse for everybody. CME damages power plants as well, but something that's rarely talked about is that risk of fire. And you did mention that. During the Carrington event, those lines the power lines, which were being used to transmit telegraph signals. These were big old clunky things, strong by modern standards, that would get so hot, sagged, and set fire to forests. The amount of current coming into telegraph offices set paper on fire. One telegraph operator was sitting near his equipment and put his hand on a metal plate, and a charge jumped from the line into his head and exited his foot. He was almost electrocuted from that. Now, you think of our homes with our appliances plugged in there. If we get a huge CME and it does nothing but charge up those power lines at a huge rate, what happens if the lines start sagging onto homes and businesses and forests and farmland? What happens if your toaster catches fire because of the power surge into it, or your computer, or your surge protector catches fire? Suppose there's 3 or 4 pulses with this. It's not just a single surge. Your toaster survives the first pulse. Your surge protector absorbs the first pulse, but doesn't absorb the second because it's fried. And your toaster now is vulnerable because it's had its circuits cooked, and boom, your toaster is now on fire. And by toaster, I mean any kind of electrical appliance plugged into your house. Now, if you're home and you have a fire extinguisher, you can go around, put out the toaster, and make sure the washing machine's not burning and everything else that's in your house. But what if your neighbor's not home and their toaster bursts into flames? Now the whole neighborhood's on fire. What do? I don't have an answer for that. If that is possible, then the risk of CME isn't just having the grid down, losing our cell phones. It's having entire cities burn uncontrollably until every burnable thing has been consumed by fire. That is what keeps me awake at night.
Yeah, and think about, I'll add another thing in there too with that. None of the fire trucks would be able to even respond because their components in the engines would be non-functional.
That's right. That's absolutely right. If you could call them and let them know there was a fire.
No, you wouldn't, because even the cell towers would be not functional. Nothing, even your landline wouldn't be functional. Nothing would be functional in the communication system either.
That's right. That's absolutely right. Think of all those high rises. People on the 35th floor whose toasters are on fire and nobody's home because they're at work. It's unimaginably horrible.
Yeah, sounds like a cycle pattern. And, you know, for human civilization, we have 8 billion people on the planet. It seems like it's a cycle through the civilization cycle as well. The society cycle overriding that on top or interwoven within it. But it seems like these cycles of great population to declined population back to static period, and increasing population to plateauing population and decreasing. We've seen this for thousands of years. I don't know why it would be any different this time. And I'm very firmly convinced that all of the cycles of history, time, population, economy, trade, agriculture, all are based on what happens with the sun. Because even in China, no emperor has ever lasted more than 400 years because they just couldn't feed the people. So that in itself just shows some sort of cyclic activity in food production based on the effects from our sun. You know, in terms of the same things we're seeing now, drought patterns moving, moisture patterns coming, flooding, unstable growing seasons. So the mandate from heaven was removed. The emperor changed. They never last more than 400 years. And, you know, that was the first indication that, hey, we might be looking at a cycle. Yeah. So all these things seem to be lining up right now, that we're heading back into a cycle, and it's always good to be prepared. That's why I was recommending in the beginning of the hour when we started talking, the book that you'd written, Cold Times, How to Prepare for the Mini Ice Age. I'm going to leave that link in the description box below the podcast here, as well as the video I'm going to do on this. But we're almost out of time, Anita, until the music starts. Any last thoughts for anybody out there?
It never hurts to prepare. Even if everything we're talking about turns out to be wrong, people are going to have issues in their lives. We're having some food, some water, extra money, extra supply setback can be a lifesaver. If you lose your job because we have an economic downturn, you've got 6 months worth of food, you're not going to have to worry about food. Any money you have can go towards your rent or your mortgage or whatever. And it is a tremendous benefit to have preparedness no matter what. So aim toward that, work toward it. The more prepared you are, the more comfortable you will be no matter what happens. And I think, obviously, it's going to get cold.